In this video, we're going to show you how to replace your drive shaft center support bearing located in the middle of your drive shaft up above your exhaust. Now, our rear damper is held on with 6 bolts. 3 of them are T55 Torx bolts going through to our rear flange here, and then we have a nut and bolt application holding the drive shaft flange to the damper itself. I'm going to go ahead and use a 1/2-inch drive ratchet with some extensions, and we're going to feed this up above the exhaust, and then we're going to use our 18mm wrench on the nut side here. We're going to remove these nuts and pull out these Torx bolts. Now we have our Torx bit into the head of the bolt. I'm going to go ahead and use my 18mm, and we did soak these down with some rust penetrant before doing this here. Pull that bolt out. So now we put our vehicle into neutral. We can't pull the key out. What we want to do is go ahead and disconnect our battery at this point. We're going to use our 10mm wrench, and we're going to loosen the nut on our ground terminal here. Once you have that loose, we're going to spin that and disconnect it. I'm going to come on over to the positive side. We're going to do the same here. I'm going to disconnect that, set that aside. Now with the vehicle in neutral and you're back underneath the vehicle, I'm going to use a pry bar, and I'm basically just going to go between a couple of the other bolts, and we can go ahead and freely spin this unit. And what we're going to do is reposition our next Torx bit bolt right here, and let's go ahead and perform the same job we just did. Feed our ratchet up through the top. We'll spin this a bit, get that nut loose. There we go. Second bolt out. Now we went ahead and we removed 2 of the Torx bit bolts going through into our rear flange here. We're now going to go ahead and remove 2 of the bolts holding the drive shaft flange to the coupler here, using our 18mm wrench on the front, 18mm wrench on the rear. Let's go ahead, loosen, and remove 2 of these. Now the reason why we're doing this here is that by keeping other bolts in there, it's going to keep this drive shaft from dropping down. It's going to keep everything supported for now where we want it. And then we'll loosen the other 2, the last 2. And we'll slowly remove them together. Now this has a nut and a washer on the back side. Pull that bolt out. All right, let's go ahead and rotate this. Get that nut and washer off, pull that bolt out. Now these are the last 2 bolts. One of these is holding the drive shaft to the damper here, and the other one is holding the damper to the back flange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get these loose pretty much all the way except for a couple threads by hand. All right, I'm going to take out our last bolt. And on the driver's side here on our exhaust, we have a O2 sensor. We want to go ahead and follow the wire up. There's a connector right here, and there's a little tab on the back side. I'm going to press in on that and disconnect the connector like so. On the bottom side of our exhaust manifold, we have a 12mm nut right here on the stud. I'm going to go ahead and loosen and remove this. And on the top side here, I'm going to go ahead and use a swivel. This upper nut on ours is a 16mm. Go ahead, loosen and remove that. Now the hardware on your particular vehicle might vary. The goal here is basically to remove the nut off of the stud, or remove the stud, however you need to separate the exhaust. Once we get this off, we're going to go ahead and repeat for the passenger side. Now we're using a pry bar going up, and we're going to get on the back side of this bushing. Our particular vehicle has a trailer hitch receiver on the back, so we can use that as leverage. And we're just basically just going to pry on this here. And we want to get that hanger off We're gonna pry bar up above our tip here and underneath the bushing, and we're just gonna pry, work that hanger off like so. All right, that is now separated. Let's go ahead and move to the passenger side, do the same over there. Now right behind our center muffler here, there are 2 more hangers. I'm gonna go ahead and use a pair of pliers to assist us with this. The exhaust is gonna be free floating, and it's only gonna be supported by our center cross beam. So you wanna go ahead and get a couple people together. You wanna go ahead and support up that exhaust. That way there nothing comes down and falls on you or twists abnormally, causing damage to any of the exhaust system. Now in front of our rear section, we have some more rubber hangers here. So let's go ahead and grab a couple people here. We're gonna pop off this rubber hanger up top, and then we'll go ahead and remove that center brace and lower the exhaust. On the center section, we have 4 13mm nuts. Let's loosen and remove those. And let's now go ahead and lower the exhaust. Next, we want to go ahead and remove these bolts here from the drive shaft to the backside of the transmission in the damper. I'm going to go ahead and use a crayon here. I'm going to use it as a marker, and I'm going to mark the damper, and I'm going to mark the drive shaft itself. So that way there, when I reinstall the drive shaft to this here, everything lines up with these holes. This isn't rotated. I want to make sure that that is properly balanced and in its factory position. On the back of our drive shaft here, before we separate this from our damper, I'm going to go ahead and use a crayon here, use it as a marker, and I'm going to mark this here. I'm going to mark this ear, and I'm going to mark it on my differential. So that way there, when we reinstall this here with our new damper, I'm going to go ahead and line up the drive shaft in the original position so it's in this factory balanced location. I want to go ahead and remove the bolt side of the drive shaft area to the front here. We're going to use our 18mm wrench on the nut side. So just going to position the drive shaft so we can get that wrench on there. We're going to use an 18mm socket on the front with our impact and remove these bolts. Now let's go ahead and rotate our drive shaft so we can go ahead and get our wrench on our next bolt. We went ahead and rotated that drive shaft. Let's get our last one here. Now I'm going to go ahead and use our pole jack on the back half of our drive shaft here. Once we get this in place, we want to go ahead and undo the support bearing in the middle. We just want this to be supported here so it doesn't swing down and hit us. The front side of the drive shaft by the transmission. If it drops, it'll fall down into the transmission mount area. It'll be safe there. Now our support bearing here is held up by 2 14mm bolts on either side. We have the screw jack holding up the tail section of the drive shaft, so I want to be careful when lowering this down. All right, let's go ahead and repeat for the other side. I'm going to go ahead and lower our screw jack here. This is going to allow our center support bearing to come down. And pull our jack out and set this to the side for now. I'm going to go ahead and grab this here, and we want to try and work the drive shaft off of the rear bushing here. I'm going to reposition our pole jack closer to the support bearing. I'm going to try working on the back section to separate that from the rear diff. We moved our screw jack closer to the back part of the drive shaft. With the damper here loose, we're going to continue to tap that forward. Now I went ahead and I installed a support strap right here. The hooks are basically in the holes where the cross member was bolted to, just in front of that there. That way there, in case this comes down, it'll catch this here and support it. I want to go ahead and focus on the front side now and separate the drive shaft from the front damper. Our drive shaft is now separating from the coupler right here. So we're going to go ahead and wiggle this and pull that out and lower the drive shaft. We're lowering our screw jack here. Now that we have our drive shaft out of the vehicle, I want to go ahead and separate the front portion here. Before we separate the front drive shaft from the rear, you want to go ahead and take your crayon and mark the front drive shaft and put a mark on the rear drive shaft so that when you reinstall it, this line matches up with the rear drive shaft. We're simply going to slide this forward, slide that off of that shaft. Now I want to go ahead and pull the bearing unit off of this here. I want to go ahead and use this bearing tool here. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this up so that this will pull the unit off of our rear portion of the drive shaft. I'm going to spin these nuts on here. Now that we have this assembled where we need it, we're going to go ahead and put our extensions on here. Now this puller tool will line up into the middle of the shaft right here, and as we tighten this with our wrench, it should pull our bearing off. We're using our 18mm wrench. On the back side here, you can actually see the bearing coming off. There we have it. I'm going to go ahead and put our support bearing on, kind of line that up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a piece of pipe that fits down over the spline shaft, but on the inner bearing unit right here. I'm going to go ahead and tap that down and on to the support there. I'm going to continue to do this until this is fully seated on the other side. And I can see on the back side here that the bearing is fully seated up against the shaft unit here on the drive shaft. Let's go ahead and put the front shaft onto the rear. Slide the boot over, making sure that our lines on the side of our drive shaft are lining up for the front to the rear. And we're going to line up the splines with the front shaft and slide this together. And push it on. We're ready for installation. Now before we install our drive shaft onto the tail side of our transmission, I'm going to take a little bit of grease and put some on the shaft here. It doesn't have to be a ton, just enough to give it a little coating here. Now we install our front drive shaft here. We want to go ahead and line up the yellow mark on the drive shaft to the yellow mark up on the damper here. And this should line up as we go back and line up the back part of the drive shaft. Let's go ahead and install our 2 bolts here. I'm just going to get this started, a few threads here. I'm going to go ahead and bolt up our front drive shaft. I did put a little bit of blue Loctite on the threads of our large bolts here. I'm going to line this up, push that up into place, install a washer on the back side, get one of those nuts started. And then we're going to go ahead and rotate the drive shaft, get the other 2 installed, and then we can go ahead and continue from there. So at this point here, we want to go ahead and tighten down our bolts. with these 3 bolts tight, let's go ahead and torque down the bolts to 43 foot-pounds. Now, in order for us to install the rear part of our drive shaft, we now need to go ahead and just lift this up. We're going to remove these bolts that we've previously installed. We previously installed them just to assist us in lining up the front drive shaft, but now we want the center section to float. All right, at this point here, we want to go ahead and rotate our drive shaft. Remember those marks that we put on our drive shaft? We have one here on the differential, and there's one on this ear on the drive shaft. So we want to go ahead and make sure this lines up. This ear goes here. We also want to go ahead and compress the drive shaft inward so we can get up over the nub here of the shaft on the differential. I'm going to put some grease up here. At this point, give that drive shaft a little bump forward. You can see it compress. You can go ahead and bring this up into position. All right. Now I want to go ahead and line up the mark here on the ear with the line on your differential. So what we want to do now is we have these metal sleeves here poking on the back side of our damper. There's 3 of those. You now want to go ahead and take that flange, rotate that. That way when we bolt this together, that metal sleeve will insert into the flange and lock in as well. Let's go ahead and install our bolts now. And we put some blue Loctite on those threads. Then we can proceed installing the other bolts. So the bolts themselves are going to go through the front side of the flange, through the coupler here. The Torx bolts go through the coupler and into the rear flange. Now that we have all the bolts installed, let's go ahead and snug those down. Now that we have all of our bolts snug down, let's go ahead and torque these down to 43 foot-pounds. And we're going to go ahead and do this for all 6. Now we went ahead and cleaned up the threads on our bolts here and put some anti-seize compound on them. Let's go ahead and get these bolts started here. Get that threaded up in there and get the second one in there. Once we have those started, let's go ahead and snug those down. Just want to make sure those are good and tight. Now let's go ahead and raise up our exhaust, and we want to go ahead and get both driver and passenger side flanges lined up. I'm going to get our nuts installed on the driver side flange. Once these 2 are caught, we're going to go over to the passenger side, and you want to go ahead and repeat the process over there. In the center section, we want to go ahead and put up our cross brace here. I want to go ahead and get 2 nuts started on this side here. All right, we'll go ahead and get the 2 on the other side started. With all 4 of those nuts started, let's go ahead and tighten those down. Now before we install these here, I'm going to go ahead and throw some grease on these here. It's going to help these pop into the rubber hangers a little bit easier. I do this for all of the hangers. And just go ahead and use your pliers or whatever you have available to go ahead and pop these back on. I want to go ahead and lower the exhaust a little bit. I want to pull this over. Let's go ahead and install the other 5 hangers. Just manipulating that exhaust around. Push up on the muffler here and get that hanger on. I'm gonna use my pry bar and just tap the pry bar with a hammer and pop that on. Now that we have all the hangers installed on the driver's side, go ahead and repeat for the passenger side. All right, so let's go ahead and snug down our down pipe to our manifold. Now you want to do this evenly. I'm just going to get this to bottom out a little bit, and then I go back, snug down the other side. I'm going to go ahead and snug that down, and then we'll come back to the other side here. Once this is tight, let's go ahead and repeat for the passenger side. Go ahead and bring up your connector for your oxygen sensor. Line that up, press that together, and you'll feel it and hear it lock in. Repeat for the passenger side. Let's go ahead and reconnect our battery here. Install the positive terminal here. Let's go ahead and tighten that down. And once you have that good and tight, go ahead and install your ground terminal. We'll do the same for this. At that point there, we can go ahead and close down our cover here, and you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.